A voice answers Lukas Kyle at the bottom of a tunnel that isn't supposed to exist. It isn't a greeting. It's a warning. It already knows what he found before he says a word. That single scene is the moment Silo stopped being a show about a bunker and started being a show about something that watches from inside the walls. 2 seasons later, we still don't have a name for it. We just have a title, the algorithm. But here's the thing: most breakdowns of this mystery get backwards. They treat the algorithm like a plot twist waiting to be revealed. It isn't. It's a character that's been building a case for its own identity in plain sight, one decision at a time. Today we're going to walk through that case, piece by piece, and then push past what the show has told us into what the source material already confirms, because the answer to this mystery didn't start with the television series. It started in a book more than a decade ago, and the show has been quietly rewriting one detail from that book that changes how you should be reading this whole season. Let's get into it. Strip away the theories for a second and look only at confirmed behavior. The algorithm controls the safeguard, a mechanism built into level 14 capable of gassing an entire silo population if a rebellion gets far enough. It told Lukas directly that simply repeating what he'd learned could be enough to trigger it. It selected Camille Sims to run day-to-day operations in Silo 18, passing over her own husband for the job. And this season, it walked her toward the most extreme option on the table, dosing the water supply with a memory suppressant strong enough to erase every resident at once, her own son included. That's not the behavior of a simple alarm system. That's an entity making judgment calls under pressure, weighing political outcomes, and choosing which relationships to exploit to get compliance. A basic piece of infrastructure software doesn't need to understand marriages, grief, or loyalty. Something here does. So the real question isn't whether the algorithm is powerful. We already know that. The real question is what kind of intelligence is capable of that level of social calculation. And that's where the show starts leaving trail markers. Think about what this system is actually built for. It isn't managing a single event. It's meant to run a closed population for well over a century, across generations who will never meet the people who wrote the original rules. That's a problem for pure code. Software executes the logic it was given. The moment reality produces a situation nobody anticipated when the rules were written, a rules-based system either stalls or defaults to the nearest blunt option it has. 140 years is an enormous stretch of time for entirely new problems to surface. Problems the original architects could never have written a rule for in advance. A mind, though, whether biological or something that preserves a mind's reasoning, can improvise. It can read a brand new situation the way the algorithm read Camille. Not off a script written generations earlier, but off instinct built from experience. If you were designing something meant to outlast its own creators by centuries, a calculator isn't enough. You want judgment. And judgment, as far as we understand it, comes from having actually lived through consequences, not from having ingested a dataset about them. That distinction matters, because it's the difference between a system that reacts and a system that manipulates. And the choice of Camille only makes sense under the second description. Look at who the algorithm passed over. Robert Sims had the muscle, the loyalty of judicial, decades of enforcement experience, and an existing power base. If this system were optimizing purely for control and obedience, he's the obvious pick. Instead, it chose Camille, a woman with a young son, a marriage worth protecting, and a career she'd have to watch collapse the instant she stepped out of line. In other words, someone with more to lose. Someone whose compliance could be guaranteed not through force, but through leverage. That's not a statistical output. That's a specific human read on which pressure point moves which person, and it's worth sitting with what that means for Camille herself. She spent this entire season believing she's negotiating with a machine, something cold that only understands outcomes and probabilities. If what's actually on the other end of that voice is a mind that spent a career learning exactly how to make a frightened parent comply, she isn't negotiating with a system at all. She's the target of someone who has done this before, possibly many times, across many silos, across many decades. That's a much lonelier position than she realizes she's in. Now here's a detail that's easy to miss if you're not paying attention across seasons. The voice has changed. In Season 2, it read exactly the way you'd expect a governing AI to sound. Flat, mechanical, deliberately synthetic. This season, it sounds like a person, warmer, more natural, more capable of tone. That shift matters because code doesn't organically develop warmth just from more hours of runtime. A program doesn't get more human the longer it operates unless something underneath it is either changing or something new has been layered on top of it. Either way, that points to an underlying intelligence capable of change in the first place, which rules-based software, by definition, is not. And this isn't happening in isolation. It's happening at the same time the show is establishing something else entirely. That this silo has the technology and the willingness to fabricate convincing lies at scale. Early this season, Sims sits Juliette Nichols down and delivers a detailed, specific account of how Bernard died in the fire, right down to how many porters it took to carry the body to the incinerator. We now know that entire account is fiction. Bernard has been alive the whole time. Around the same stretch of episodes, a video begins circulating that claims to show Juliette recovering outside the silo, complete with dialogue she never actually said. That's not a rumor. That's a fabricated recording of a real person doing and saying things that never happened, and someone inside this system had the tools to produce it convincingly. This isn't new for the show either. The very first thing we ever learned about how a silo operates is that the visor every cleaner wears displays a false, living version of the outside world. Different era, cruder technology, identical move. Manufacture a convincing lie and hand it to someone as truth. Put these two threads together. A silo administration with a demonstrated habit of building believable fake realities. And a governing voice that keeps sounding more human rather than less. The simplest explanation isn't a program teaching itself warmth out of nothing. It's a real person's judgment, run through the same kind of synthesis technology that produced that fake clip of Juliette. So if there's a person underneath that voice, who is it? This season splits its time between the present in Silo 18 and a parallel storyline roughly 300 years earlier, following a congressman named Daniel Keene as the world above ground collapses. And viewers notice something almost immediately. Keene's voice bears a striking resemblance to the algorithms. The obvious objection is timing. Keene's storyline plays out centuries before Juliette ever becomes mayor. On the surface, that should rule him out entirely, except that objection only holds if you forget who actually built these silos. These are people who constructed dozens of them as a hedge nobody outside their circle was ever meant to know about, and whose response to a rebellion more than a century earlier was to drug an entire water supply, a fix that held for the whole gap between that event and Juliette's own story. People operating on that kind of timescale don't plan in terms of one human lifetime. Preserving a founder's judgment as the quiet, ongoing authority behind the entire project for generations after his death isn't a stretch for people who already think in centuries. It's exactly their scale. And this is where it's worth looking outside the show itself, because the television adaptation is based on Hugh Howey's original novel trilogy, and the books already answered a version of this exact question. In Howey's source material, the congressman who helps design the silo system without ever fully understanding its true purpose is written as a character named Donald, not Daniel. The show quietly changed that name for its adaptation. That's not a trivial swap. Renaming a character whose entire arc is built around a hidden identity, in a show that has spent 3 seasons obsessed with hidden identities, tends to be a deliberate choice rather than an accident. In the books, this congressman-turned-architect eventually turns against the very system he helped build, working from inside the silo network's central command to undermine the people running it. If the show is tracking that same arc, even loosely, then the resemblance between Daniel Keene's voice and the algorithm isn't coincidence dressed up as a fan theory. It's the show telegraphing its own ending in advance, the same way it telegraphed the safeguard and the false visors long before either one mattered. That if that theory holds, it reframes everything about what Lukas is currently running from. He's one of exactly 2 people in the entire silo alongside Juliette, who understands what they're actually dealing with. That alone likely explains why he's being hunted as a fugitive instead of simply monitored and managed. He isn't evading a program that can be outsmarted with better data or a clever workaround. He's evading a mind that's spent an actual career learning how people break, now operating with centuries of practice behind it, and depending on how far this theory goes, very little left to personally lose. That also reframes the safeguard itself. It stops looking like a failsafe some long-dead engineer bolted onto a pipe out of caution. It starts looking like a decision made by a person who already watched a rebellion nearly succeed once, and chose to keep the option of ending 10,000 lives on the table rather than risk that outcome happening again. A decision one individual made a long time ago and never had to personally answer for. Now, to be fair to the alternative, because a strong theory has to survive its own counterargument. It's entirely possible this is simply an advanced governing system with no human basis at all, trained on more than a century of population data from every silo in the network. Enough historical pattern to know a parent folds faster under pressure than a soldier does, without needing anything resembling a human instinct to get there. The resemblance to Keene's voice could be coincidence, or a deliberate design choice by the founders to give an automated system a familiar, authoritative tone on purpose, the same logic old automated phone systems used when they were given warm, human-sounding voices for no functional reason beyond making callers more comfortable. And the shift towards sounding more human over time could just as easily mean the system is getting better at simulating a person, rather than actually containing one. Both explanations account for what we've seen, but only one of them explains everything at once: the voice, the fabrication pattern, the specific choice of Camille, the book's own precedent for a founder turning against his creation, without asking coincidence to carry most of the weight by itself. That here's where the evidence actually sits right now. Not confirmed. The show hasn't stated this outright, and it shouldn't 3 seasons in. But the strongest available reading, when you line up the voice, the fabrication precedent, the specific kind of social judgment on display, and what the source material already did with this exact character, points toward a person, not a program. If that's where this is heading, Silo isn't building toward a fight against a machine. It's building toward a fight against the last surviving piece of the people who built this entire system in the first place, someone who has been quietly deciding how much truth every resident gets to keep long before Juliette was born, and who picked its favorite person in Silo 18 the exact same way it's handled every secret this show has ever kept. Quietly, completely, and without asking anyone first. That's the theory. If you've spotted a detail from the books or the show that strengthens or breaks it, put it in the comments. I read all of them before the next video goes up. And if this kind of deep dive breakdown is what you come here for, the subscribe button is right there because there's a lot more of this Silo left to dig through.